Hello everybody. My name is Siranusa Karmazian. I'm from ITML. Actually, we're coordinating this project. So thank you for your participation in today's event, the SHIELD workshop. And the purpose of this workshop is actually to demonstrate Sentinel to our external SMEs. As Ruben told you, some of you may have already tried, but the MVP version of the Sentinel platform. So we have advanced and enhanced our platform a lot. And the purpose is now to present you the full-featured version of our platform.
Hello everyone, this is Yannis from IDER. We are one of the technical partners developing Sentinel, having a good overview of what we have been through in the Sentinel journey. I'd like to welcome you again, and let's see what Sentinel looks like and what's in it for you. Just to make things faster and easier, we won't go through the registration and account creation process, which I assume will be straightforward for you. And we'll just jump into a demo account we have created, where most of the data has been pre-populated, and it will be simpler for you to just look around with me. So I'll just walk you through invalid credentials. Let's try that again. We still have bugs and glitches here and there, so be patient if you run into any of these. Okay, here's our dashboard. Before we start the demo, I will just run you quickly through a couple of the points in Siranus's presentation, like an hour ago. What we'd like to achieve with Sentinel is what we call evidence-based compliance. So what we're trying to do with Sentinel is bring together, so to say, the domains of personal data protection and cybersecurity. So in a sense, and also like Philippe said before, the legislation in GDPR doesn't always specify individual measures, be them organizational or technical measures, while on the other hand, it's evident that cybersecurity breaches or data breaches that happen due to lack of security definitely affect the privacy and the personal data at the same time. So we're trying to bring both of them into the picture and see how we can effectively tackle them. The first step is awareness and training, and basically a basic understanding on the part of the SMEs of what is GDPR and what does it concern us, what is all the fuss about personal data processing and what forms does this processing take, etc. And the way Sentinel does that is by asking you to model your own data processing in the form of processing activities. This is how it brings forward this awareness. So you might also remember the number of use cases that Siranus presented before. We have 7 of them right now, but we'll focus on this demo. We'll mostly focus on the first 3 ones, and maybe spend a little bit of time on the others. The 3 ones, they were called profiling, self-assessment, and recommendations. So when we say profiling in Sentinel, we mean populating your organization profile, talking about your organization, and of course creating your personal data processing activities. There are 2 parts to profiling again. If you go to my organization, you will have a chance to look at what we call the basic information of your organization, and anything that is organization-wide, not related to individual processing activities. And here under data protection, we also have this dashboard widget here. We have the processing activities. So both your organization data, which is everything that pertains to the whole of your company or your organization, and on the other hand, the processing activities that relate to specific business processes or specific data processing that you do, that can be bundled into one unit that we call the processing activity. Both of them are parts of profiling. So in a nutshell, having populated your organization data and having created at least one or more processing activities, you're considered to have completed your profiling. If you click on the Get Started button here on the bottom left, we have created a quick, let's say, walkthrough the steps you should have created. If you click on the checkboxes, you can manually increase this progress percentage. The first two are, and the first three, so to say, are called complete your organization profile, which is all the stuff that you will do in my organization in this sidebar here. The second says create your first processing activity. Of course, you can create more. And the third one says commit API to the ROPA. We'll talk about it a little bit later. The ROPA, just to call it out quickly, the ROPA is an abbreviation for the record of processing activities. And it's considered, let's say, a more formal way of doing your, observing your recording obligations under the GDPR, or of having a record of processing activities. Okay, quickly jumping into my organization here. My organization consists of 6 tabs here: basic data, contacts, generic asset profile, asset inventory, GDPR compliance, and measures. Basic data, you can see it over here, your company name, the sector in which you operate, your country, and your organization size. Needless to say, the size of your organization will also determine some of your GDPR obligations. For example, the recording obligation. You may edit that here. Contacts are so to say, the people responsible for data protection in your organization. They could be a GDPR representative or some other responsible person. It's important to create these persons here because these will be the people available for assigning to processing activities later. So if you don't create any contact persons here, you will not be able to populate your processing activities later. Make sure you create at least one contact person when you create your profile. Okay, a few words about the assets and how we treat them in Sentinel. You will see 2 tabs related to asset. The generic asset profile makes some, let's say, make some assumptions about how you deploy and own assets within the whole of your organization. So here you will not declare or create specific cyber assets, but you may create, let's say, an image of how you treat cyber assets within the whole of your organization. Okay, you will, if you click edit here, you will be able to get some help by hovering over these 2 tips here. The 2 most important questions are asset ownership and asset deployment model. For those of you who are not familiar with the word, when we say asset, we mean cyber asset, which is any piece of software, equipment, or other asset, so to say, where that might be subject to threats or any other risk. Okay, so here ownership defines whether you own or whether yourself you can configure and deploy these assets, or whether you depend on third parties to do so. So if you own them, you should click own. Or if you only depend on third parties to do so and you can't have any responsibility for how they are configured, you should click not owned. This is very important to get right because it will affect the kind of recommendations Sentinel will give you. Okay. And now something a bit more technical. The asset deployment model, or the locality, is where you specify where most of your assets reside and how you manage them from a locality perspective. Okay, so if your let's say if your IT equipment, just to be more specific, if your IT equipment or your cyber assets are deployed on-premise or locally, you should use the on-premise. If it's on the cloud, you can select the cloud model, or if it's a hybrid approach, you should click on hybrid. And here, your cyber expertise level will refer to the average understanding of cybersecurity from the staff that is responsible for it, which can be beginner, intermediate, or expert, and it will affect how Sentinel recommends trainings, tools, and other materials and measures. Okay, so again, this generic asset profile will affect the whole of the organization, and it's important to get right. since you can't differentiate between processing activities for the generic asset profile. Now the asset inventory is a more detailed way to make to create an image of your assets and their deployment. So here you can create individual assets, which all of them, they have a very detailed data set here. And after you give the name and description, etc., of the asset, you may select a specific information that will lead to what cyber experts call the CPE, okay, the Common Platform Enumerator, or version of the asset, which can then take part in a specific cybersecurity risk assessment. By the way, the cybersecurity risk assessment is the third of the 3 self-assessment tools that Sentinel offers, and it's designed to assess the risks, vulnerabilities, and threats, etc., associated with a specific processing activity as a grouping of the business processes you have. Okay. So here, what we do is we create a list of assets within the whole of the organization. So we may create, for example, like 10 or 20 or 50 assets. And then we can assign specific assets to specific processing activities so they can be assessed for risks, for cybersecurity risks. It's not mandatory to create them here. We might leave this list blank and then instead create the assets in the processing activity, if we like. Or if we don't want to do a cybersecurity risk assessment, we can leave it blank altogether and just be based on the generic asset profile, if we think that represents our organization in a satisfactory way. Okay, so again, these things here, individual assets, they pertain to the cybersecurity risk assessment, which is a detailed assessment of the risks and threats associated with our asset setups. Now, the next tab, GDPR compliance, is part of the GDPR CSA, okay, the GDPR compliance self-assessment, which estimates our compliance level with the GDPR. And these specific questions here, they pertain to 2 aspects of GDPR compliance, okay, data protection management and the breach management, which essentially affect the whole of the organization and not specific processing activities. Okay, so the GDPR compliance self-assessment assesses 6 different aspects of compliance. 2 of them are the organization-wide data protection management practices and the breach management practices. And here you can already see the result of a past assessment, which says that data protection management is partially compliant and the breach management is partially compliant. If we change anything here, we can request a new assessment, so we can update the compliance status here, or we can always edit our choices. Okay, some of the choices that we do for the whole organization, we can only make one choice, as you see here, and for some of them, we can make multiple ones. Okay, but it's clear that on the first group, we will be declaring stuff related to how we manage data protection globally. On the second group, we will be answering questions on how we manage data breaches globally. Now, for processing activity-specific aspects of GDPR compliance, we'll have the chance when we edit the processing activities to declare things. Okay, so 2 of the aspects are here because they are global, and the other 4 ones, and 2 plus 4 is 6. Okay, the other 4 ones are in the processing activities. We'll have a chance to review them later. The last tab is measures, and these clearly refer to the organizational technical measures that we have implemented for the company, for the organization. It's clear again, because we're here into my organization, that these are the global measures. When we say global, we mean organization-wide. Okay. When we click edit, we have an overview of how these measures are depicted. Here we start with here we start with the organizational measures, and around here, around endpoint security, we start with the technical measures. And the measures per category, okay, so here we have one category, here we have another category, and so on. And then within the same category, they are grouped by risk. Okay, so here are the low risk measures, here are the medium risk measures, which is a way to say measures that are appropriate for a medium risk of personal data processing. And they, on the last column, we have the measures, organizational and technical ones, that are appropriate for higher risk of personal data processing. Here we're missing, I think we're missing some, we have much longer descriptions, which make it much clearer to see what each measure is about, which will be inserted here. Again, these are not mandatory. It's optional to fill these questions about the measures, and they're only used here for tracking purposes. So Sentinel will not assess what measures you have put in place, and they're only used, so to say, to keep track of how many of the recommendations you have implemented and or not. Okay. So what is actually taken into account by the self-assessments and the recommendations is everything that you have declared up to GDPR compliance, for example, but not the measures. And the same is true for the processing activities. Okay, wrapping up this section, my organization is about the organization profiling we do for the organization as a whole. Then, if we go to data protection and processing activities, here we have a chance to create or edit the specific processing activities that are specific business processes, and according to GDPR, we should be recording the processing that happens and anything related to it. So one of the, I think the biggest challenges of the participants coming to create the processing activity is to answer the question, okay, so what is a processing activity for me? What should I put in here? It's not clear at all for newcomers usually what is a processing activity. The guidance we can offer here, and Philippe, feel free to jump in if you can offer some extra insight here, is that anything, any type of processing of personal data that you do, and processing may include recording, capturing, storing, accessing, consulting, deleting, altering, whatever of the personal data, is considered a data processing activity. But actually, we don't like to go into this really bottom-down approach, and would like to group all this processing under business processes, which actually makes more sense for a business. So, so to say, anything that you do for your customer, which includes possibly the processing of the personal data, for us, it's a processing activity. Every business process that you do for your employees, for example, paying them or hiring them and managing HR, is also a processing activity. Stuff that you do for marketing, sending out marketing messages or emails or advertising, it's also examples of processing activities. One of the let's say exercises that you have to solve is to identify for your own organization what type of processing you are doing, and try to group them under business processes that do make sense in terms of processing of personal data, and create the corresponding processing activities here, and model them to the best of your ability to reality, and then commit them to the ROPA, as we said before. Okay, the ROPA here, it's on the lower part of the screen, and it's the official register of the processing activity. Okay, so the difference between the processing activities here on the top and the ROPA, which is here on the bottom, is that basically the ROPA is something that is immutable. You can't change it. Once you commit the processing activity to the ROPA, it's there forever, so to say. So here you can see this example that says fulfill customer order version 2. Which means some operator here for this organization created this processing activity here that said fulfill customer order. It committed this PA to the ROPA, then made some changes. So they may change some data here in the processing activity, and then committed it again. So it created the version 2. And if it commits it for the third time, it will create a version 3. But both the current version and the previous versions of the processing activity in the ROPA is always viewable and auditable. Both by yourself and by possibly future third parties. Okay. Okay, going back to the processing activities, here we have this managing HR example that we created for the purpose of the demo. We can view it here. This is the screen where we can view the processing activity. Some buttons here to manage it, edit, commit to the ROPA, like we said before, or delete. If you delete the processing activity that was previously committed to the ROPA, of course the ROPA entries will remain, needless to say. Here are some basic information for the identity of the processing activity. Here we have some assessment results, if GDPR CSA or DPIA had been executed before for this processing activity. And here we have all the data that has been entered until now. Okay, so the specific data for the processing activity is where a lot of the detail of Sentinel is about. Okay, so the processing purpose and all the specific data here, the data subject and what you do with them, the actual data processed is on the third tab. Recipients, if it has any possible recipients as a result of the processing, it's all here. The possible high risks or additional, what we'll say, the additional risk criteria associated with processing activities here, measures, GDPR compliance, and assets. All these tabs are here where you can edit it and view it. Okay, we'll go through them one by one as we create, or better recreate this managing HR processing activity. So I'll just go on to delete it here. Okay. Okay, so it's gone, and we'll try to recreate it together from scratch, so you can have an overview of what we have in mind when we create the processing activity. Okay. Right. So I click on Add here. By the way, I forgot to mention the help. Okay, so before let's say a few words about it first. No matter in which screen you are in Sentinel, you can always click on Help here on the right-hand side, and this drawer comes in, which is context-aware, and it will display some help for you, which is appropriate to the screen you are currently. Okay. You're welcome to browse to the help, okay, which will guide you through each procedure. Two screens that you should be sure you have always gone through is if you click on the home screen here, you should always read this introduction text, which will prime you and give you the basic tenets of Sentinel and what it is about. Definitely make sure to read how does it work. So this stuff here is important. And then you should click on this pipeline of actions, which is the getting started guide. Okay, so this getting started screen is also something you should get right. How Sentinel works and what you should do. All these steps are important to get right. Okay. Okay, so we'll close the help now and try to get you here. So step one, the basic identity of the processing activity. Yeah. Let's call it managing HR. In the details, we just write that this is about the process of recruitment, onboarding, and management of human resources. Our organization role is controller. You should be possibly aware of the difference between the controller and the processor, or in some rare cases, the joint controller model. Are you assigning partly or wholly the processing to a third processor? No. Or to an external processor. Just type here on the release date, for example. The responsible person is chosen, like we said before, from the contact persons of the organization. The second group of questions is about the processing purpose. It's one of the most important to get right from a GDPR perspective. So here we have some free text to give the purpose description, which in our case is capturing, storing, accessing, etc. Personal data of the employees for the purpose of managing HR functions. Yeah. So the primary purpose category, which should also be selected carefully, is HR. It has a purpose. Because we can't assess what you write here, but we can definitely assess what you chose from this select list here. Okay. We can also give a secondary purpose that says that we can pass on the result of this process into another processing activity that's called execute payroll. We'll select as a lawful basis for processing contract, even though you might argue that it is consent plus contract or whatever, but this is up to the legal guys to sort out the HR functions. I click on next. We go to the okay. The third, the fourth, the fifth, and the sixth part are the most, let's say, juicy parts of describing the processing activity. The data subjects are the individuals, okay, the physical persons that are subject to the processing. Here we have a chance to describe them, and we'll just say employees and candidate employees. So I'll just click on employees and citizens, which, by the way, they're not considered as very high risk subjects. Whereas if I had selected patients or children or stuff like that, that are considered potentially higher risk for processing. It could affect my my risk factors when doing the assessments. This is the actual data processed, where we try to identify and profile what types of data are processed. So I'll just write here on the description that these are the employee personal data, which are necessary for doing the HR functions. For data categories, it's very important to carefully pick all of the data points that are possibly captured, stored, accessed, etc., okay, in our HR database. Family information, maybe social security number or similar. Okay, these are at least 10 data points. We should carefully select it. Also very carefully select if there are any special data categories. The special categories are those that pertain to a possible higher risk of processing. So if you have data revealing race, ethnic origin, political opinions, religious beliefs, etc., all of these are candidates for higher risk processing, and you should carefully review it and select it if they are there. We don't have anything like that. Maybe sometimes that for HR, but I don't know. Give the months of retention for the data, very important to get right. Click on next. Recipients, I'll just write, because the secondary purpose, internal processing activity, execute payroll, and the recipient type is internal department. So we don't have any other processing aside from that. Additional risk criteria, if you are doing any processing like that here, carefully review and select evaluation or scoring, automated decision making, systematic monitoring, etc. All of these are co-assessed as potential additional points of risk within this PA. We don't have any for this, so we'll just leave it like that. And here we're on the 7th tab, GDPR compliance. This is very similar to what you had seen before in the organization, but it is the other 4 areas that are covered for GDPR compliance assessment, which are consent, personal data lifecycle management. So how do you manage personal data within the lifecycle of this specific processing activity? And the management of rights, which is essentially how you enable the individuals to exercise their fundamental rights in terms of data processing. Rights like the right to know and to review and to approve, or to request the deletion or the transport to someone else, the processing, etc., of this data. And how easy do you make that for them, and so on. There is a 4th category that's called the recording of personal data and how you manage it, which is assessed from the answers that you give to the previous steps. So we should carefully assess how we do things here and go through all of this list and give careful answers to these questions, which will be assessed for the GDPR compliance. And when we're done, just click on next. Here we can link existing assets to this processing activity. So if I click on link, I will have a chance to just add the assets from my organization here. Or if I want to create some new ones, I just click on add and create new assets for this processing activity. This is not mandatory. The previous one is also not mandatory if you don't want to run the GDPR CSA assessment. This one is only needed for the cybersecurity risk assessment. And the final step, which are the OTMs, or organizational technical measures, again, it's not mandatory and it's optional. And it is here just for the sense of tracking which of the recommended measures you have already implemented or not. Okay. Right now, you haven't gotten any recommendations yet, so they're all unchecked. So you might have a chance to review them. And then it's the final step. We can submit the processing activity, and we are done. Okay, just wait 2 or 3 seconds. We should be redirected, back to the screen. And here's the new processing activity we just created. Essentially, we're done with it. Here we have 10 data instances. You can hover or click here and see what was declared. And either using these buttons here, or if you view the processing activities down here, you can request new assessment. Okay. So I will just request a new GDPR compliance assessment. So, of course, the results are not very trustworthy now because I didn't carefully complete all of the GDPR compliance points here. So here are the results of the GDPR compliance assessment. Not very compliant since I didn't complete many of the questions. The same goes for the data protection impact assessment, except that the DPIA doesn't take into account yet your answers here, but it will mostly take into account your answers on the previous steps. I'll just run it like that. This is essentially, I think it's a relatively low risk processing activity, sort of. Yeah. So both this estimated risk level and this estimated risk level are both low, which is to be expected since we didn't declare any sensitive data subject, any sensitive data, or any additional risk criteria, which is what mostly affects risk. Okay. And for higher risk processing, we might get different recommendations, and an actual DPIA might be required, and so on. As for the CSRA assessment, we can request one, even though we haven't assigned a lot of assets in this PA, so I can walk you through the results. So this is a CSRA. Here are the results. Yeah, I can't see a lot of things since we don't have any assets linked to any assets that can be assessed linked here. We just have these two assets that are declared here, but no risks assessed yet. Okay, going back to the dashboard, view the processing activities. What we'll do is, as a final step, we'll create a permanent record of this new processing activity we created. We just click on the commit to ROPA, make sure that you read this disclaimer here, and proceed. Yeah. So the first version of this processing activity was committed to the ROPA. You can see it up here. I click on view. Here is the record. We can see all the answers here. Everything that is recorded is effectively captured here. We can't edit it, only review it. And if there are any previous versions, we would also be able to see the previous versions here and look at their details. You can also export it in PDF for audit purposes and so on. If I go here on this older one, optimized marketing, I can see the previous versions just by clicking on view. Okay, so we quickly went through that, and with that, we actually finish the sections of. If I click here, we have completed an organization profile. We have created our first processing activity. We have committed to the ROPA. We have also executed a GDPR CSA, a DPIA, and the cybersecurity risk assessment. It's not part of this list. It should be, but we have executed all three assessments. So right now, what we're missing is generating a set of recommendations. So how to do that is you click on policy here, okay, and just click on request new recommendations. What that does is populate this tab here that says recommendations. It takes a few seconds to complete. Okay, so here we are. On the first tab that says assessments, this gives me the chance to review all of the assessment tools results. So here are the results of the GDPR CSA, and here are the results of the DPIA. Okay, these two results are for the organization as a whole, and these results are for the specific processing activities. The four categories of processing that we were talking about before. You can always click or hover on the tooltips to see some more information. So I do click on recommendations here to go to the actual recommendations. And here we are. Recommendations in Sentinel are of three types. The first and most important one are the measures, or OTMs. OTMs mean organizational and technical measures, and these ones are, let's say, broken down into roughly 20 categories, 10 for organizational and 10 for technical. You can tell them by their first letter here. This is O1 all the way to O10, and this is technical 4, technical 5, technical 10. The first group is for recommendations that pertain to the organization as a whole. That's why they're called global. And the second group on the bottom is recommendations related to individual processing activities. You can also see that most of the technical ones fall under this type: authentication and access control, logging and monitoring, and so on. Okay, so if I click on this accordion arrow here, I get all the details for any of the categories. First, we start with the measures. Here, this T1H2 means that this is a technical one, high risk. Number 2 measure that says, for example, device authentication and access control. It gives me a description of what the measure is about, okay, and what processing activities it is applicable to. Okay, so these recommendations, they apply to all of the organization, so any differentiation that happens at the level of the processing activity is actually seen here. Here's one of my processing activity, and for that one, this recommendation is pending. This is another processing activity for which the implementation is also pending, and so on and so forth. This is the next measure. This is the next measure. Sorry for the highlights, and so on. These are all for the T1, okay, which is the authentication and access control. After the measures are done, we'll start with software and tools, which is the recommended software that has to do with authentication and access control. I invite you all to review all of the software and go to these URLs to check it out. Some of the recommendations are what we call Sentinel plugins. So, for example, the IDMS is a Sentinel component. And after the tools and software is finished, we have the training material where you can just read and inform yourself depending on your cybersecurity level. So all the material that is recommended here, it is recommended based on the cyber expertise level that we have declared for the organization. I know it's a more comprehensive list, but right now we're working to break it down and minimize it. And the same goes on for the rest of the categories. It's a pretty long policy, okay, this set of recommendations, but you can always download it and export it for a better overview. Okay, so these are the recommendations. One of the most critical parts of Sentinel, actually. Very quickly, these recommendations are based on the profiling inputs that you have here. They're not based on the results of the self-assessment. It's very important to say that. So the way you were assessed in terms of GDPR compliance or data protection impact assessment or from cybersecurity assessment will not affect the recommendations. It will give you its own output, which we can take into account. But whatever you have declared here in the processing activities themselves or into my organization, all these steps up to asset inventory and up to here, this will determine the types of recommendations you get. And after you get these recommendations, you can just edit the measures here, and just by enabling them, you can keep track of them in the policy. So for example, if I was recommended this measure and I enable it here and save it, I will see it as implemented and not as pending from now on. Okay, I know it's a lot of stuff to take on board, but we're quickly going through it. We're already past our half-hour slot, so very quickly I will let you know about the observatory. The cyber range will be tackled immediately afterwards, so I'll just let you know quickly. Observatory, which is the last step here on the sidebar. Let us mark these recommendations. Yeah. Threat intelligence is about getting latest insight on possible threats or indicators of compromise, as we say, from the MISP. We have some public MISP instances to which we're connected, and the Sentinel MISP instance, which syncs with them. And it usually, regularly updates and syncs with them to give you the latest security threats. This is a section that is of interest just to cybersecurity staff and cybersecurity professionals. Here are the latest records. You can just browse using this pager here. We have the chance to, like a classic MISP way, to just contribute to these entries or create our own events. Here on the report incident button, we can create our own events. Okay, and submit it. So this is how reporting incident works. I think this needs some work in order to make it friendlier to basic IT stuff. That's fine. And knowledge base, on the other hand, it's, let's say, a little bit more static repository, even though it also updates very regularly. It's a repository of vulnerabilities and threats. Threats come in the form of attack scenarios that come from CAPEC Mitra. Okay. the cybersecurity experts among us will recognize that. You can just browse through them. Right now, there's a small number of 140,000 vulnerabilities we can view with all their details and their associated weaknesses, threats, and affected CPEs, and so on and so forth, one by one. So it's just a static knowledge base where you can just browse through it and search for specific keywords that are contained within each vulnerability or threat. And it will be very, very soon populated with also some static articles and contents which will be better suited to entry-level users and also more related to data protection and not just cybersecurity. I think that's it. Again, I know it's a lot to take on board. The dashboard is also worth like 1 minute. The dashboard brings everything under one roof. So here on your dashboard, you can see your processing activities, their image on the permanent record over here, the results of your assessments, including the cybersecurity risk assessment, which has its dedicated area here. We can also view if we have some high or some, let's say, risky assets. You can see the details here and what are the associated risks with our own declared cyber assets. Okay, very important to check if you have current vulnerabilities in your assets. This is the quickest way to do it. Using these buttons, you can always re-trigger each assessment and so on. And finally, on the bottom right side here are your recommendations and a quick overview of how many of the OTMs you have implemented, how many are pending, and so on. So just to give you a bird's eye view. I hope it wasn't too intimidating. And thank you, and I'll be happy to take questions.